I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for May the 22nd, 2024, 23rd in the West Pacific and North Indian Ocean. As is always the case in these videos, thought that expression are mine alone, and in making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to the local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we're now getting active here in portions of the Eastern Hemisphere as we look towards the first formations in the Northern Hemisphere as this tropical season kicks off, both in the Bay of Bengal and in the Philippine Sea. We're going to start off in the West Pacific as we have a more imminent formation threat there, and then we'll talk about the Bay of Bengal system after that. So I'll leave a timestamp to that if you want to skip ahead. But for now, we're going to focus on Invest 93W, which is right here east of the Philippines. We've talked about potential formation all month, and finally it is happening now. We have an area of low pressure that is finally getting concentrated east of the Philippines, and it's going to be continue to do this as the environment is favorable for continued development over the next several days. And we could be looking at potential impacts as the system gets pretty close to the coastline of the Philippines. And then we'll be looking at the system recurving. We'll have to see if it's a threat later down the road, though, to areas in Japan. But overall, the system is doing fairly well for itself. This is the close-up infrared loop right now, and I apologize for those flashing frames, but you can see the broad area of low pressure now getting more concentrated convection around it. You can kind of compare between 93W and 99B in the Bay of Bengal, where here we've got just a ton of spread out convection, nothing really well defined, and so that system's not close to being a tropical cyclone. But if you look at 93W, all the convection here is much more concentrated to the area of low pressure, and in this process it's going to get it towards being a tropical cyclone, and the chance of that is high now. In fact, I think the Japan Meteorological Agency forecast it to happen within the next 24 hours, which I could definitely see, given the environment that it's in. Speaking of that environment, you can see on water vapor imagery, again, apologies for those flashing frames, you can see the divergence aloft. We've got some cloud elements here moving off towards the north and east. If you look at the 200 millibar plot from the GFS, you can see exactly what's happening here. We've got an area of high pressure aloft building, and this is contributing to anticyclonic flow aloft. This would be clockwise in the northern hemisphere, and we're also getting what looks to be a little bit of support from this upper trough here, maybe helping a little bit with that divergence, getting it away from the storm. Now, over the coming days, this high is only going to balloon up even more. You can see it get better in place and right underneath the storm, or sorry, right on top of the storm, as it gets close to the Philippines. And you can see this is a very divergent flow. We've got a couple troughs aloft. These are helping with the poleward outflow channel. We've got an upper trough still sitting back here off towards the east. This is helping some outflow off towards the south and east. And we've even got a little bit of a outflow channel opening up over the Philippines, maybe getting contributed by some areas of high pressure aloft in the Indian Ocean. So we've got a pretty good low shear environment for this system. Now, this system will not likely rapidly develop, just given how broad it is. You can see that this is going to take time. This is a very broad low, and it's not going to be rapidly intensifying for the next few days. It may have a phase of more quick to rapid intensification. Once it gets more of a jet interaction, it looks like we may get a little bit of one as it heads north. You can see some of these warmer colors showing up here in this plot. Those are jet streaks, and those can attribute to jet streaks or jet interactions rather as a storm moves north, and that could allow the system to intensify fairly quickly. But regardless of if it's going to rapidly intensify or not, the most important thing here is where is it going to impact. Right now, the steering pattern is going to be putting it right towards the Philippines. You can see on this 500 millibar anomaly map, we have an area of high pressure north of the system, and this is going to be in place for the next couple of days, and it's going to help the system track generally northwest. So you can see here's the high, and the storm's tracking on the western side of that, very close to the coastline of the Philippines. Now, exactly where does it come into the Philippines? Does it come ashore? Does it stay offshore? Those are questions that have yet to be answered, and they won't be answered for a little bit more. But what we can tell you overall is that the system's likely to get very close to the coast, and we could have some heavy rainfall spread across the Philippines. And if the system does manage to intensify some, it will likely bring some increased wind impacts, particularly along the immediate coastline just west of where the system is. I don't think this is going to be a widespread wind issue across the Philippines, but especially along the coastline here in the central Philippines, we could be looking at some increased wind impacts. But most intensification seems to take place after the system makes its closest approach. What's going to happen is the system is going to be tracking northwest again with this bridge, but this bridge is going to continue moving east. We'll have some low pressure development here over China, and that alongside the ridge now east of the storm, you can see the low here, is going to start bringing the storm back towards the north and east, and by this point the environment will be very favorable, like I showed you here on the tuna millibar flow plot, and we could get some more rapid intensification here. You can see that type of track take place here in the European, having the storm come northwest, again the area 5 pressures here, and then we start to see the system recurve as some low pressure development takes place across portions of Asia, and then we start to see the system begin to intensify. And you can see the clear indication of where it's likely to intensify here on the European ensembles, with most ensembles showing once again intensification after the closest approach. But you can see we do have some members trying to get it a little bit strong near the Philippines, and that's where we could get some increased wind impacts again along the immediate coastline. But you can see a lot of these tracks are showing the system coming towards the Philippines and then recurving. It doesn't look like this is going to be a scenario where the storm comes into the Philippines and then maybe goes into the South China Sea. This will likely be a recurving storm, just giving the troughiness that we're expecting to build here over Eastern Asia. But further west, we're looking at another broad area of low pressure here across the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. You can see here in the close-up loop, we have just a very large mass of convection, and I'm actually just going to go back to the big loop here so you can see everything that's going on. We have convection firing across really the entire southern half of the Bay of Bengal and a good chunk of the Arabian Sea, with the ongoing westerly wind bursts across this area. And right now, what we're watching is for something similar to what 93 is doing right now to take place across this entire region. You can see that right now, all this convection is just spread out across a large area. And that's to be expected. We have a very broad low with the westerly wind burst. But what we need for tropical cyclone development is all the convection like 93W has here consolidating into a more compact area. So we nearly need something, say, more circular here in the Bay of Bengal to form, rather than having this just strung out area of thunderstorm activity across the Bay of Bengal. Once that happens, we can start to see more development take place. As of right now, that's not the case. This is an ASCAT pass that we got earlier in the day today. You can see that general trough axis across the Bay of Bengal, and it looks like it does, based on satellite imagery, continue off towards the west outside of this pass. And you can see it here even on the GFS ensemble, or not GFS ensemble, this is a deterministic run showing the broad area of low pressure associated with it. Now, something of note, just before we go more on about the Bay of Bengal system, there is potential that something may try to form in the Arabian Sea. You can see if we look at the big view of the satellite imagery, we have a lot of convection here over southern India and into the Arabian Sea. I have not seen much signs of an area of low pressure developing. You can see there's nothing really here on ASCAT, and even further south, there's no real signs of a well-defined circulation. But it is something worth watching. It could bring perhaps some increased rainfall, although I wouldn't imagine so, just given the amount of convection we're seeing there in southern India. But it may bring some enhanced bands of rain and maybe some enhanced bands of wind to southern India. Really, our main area, though, that we're watching for tropical development is here in the Bay of Bengal. And you can see that here on the GFS with, again, here's a broad low, and we have some increased vorticity in the Bay of Bengal where the tag of Invest 99B is. But as we go over the next 2 to 3 days, we start to see it consolidate here into a more compact low, like we talked about with 93W, and then it comes north, and then we could be looking at impacts from the center of the circulation, at least, in portions of Myanmar, Bangladesh, or India. You can see the Europeans a bit more lenient on this. It's a little bit more conservative on it, not tightening up as much as the GFS shows, keeping still a fairly broad circulation. I do think that these two models are a little bit showing their biases. I think the GFS is showing its strong bias. I think it's going a little bit too strong here. It does actually pop out an eye, and you'll see this in a moment on simulated infrared. While the European remains a bit weak, it does have a weaker bias, and I think it's staying a little bit too weak here. I think overall, the scenario that we're going to see play out is that we're going to get something in between this. Not a strong storm like the GFS depicts, but not as weak as a European depicts. We could get, a tropical storm out of this. Maybe we could get something close to a cyclone, but as of right now, I don't see any very strong signal for a very strong storm out of this, just given how broad it is overall. You can see what I was talking about with the convection here on the GFS simulated infrared loop. You can see here's all the convection once again strung out. We don't really have a compact bubble, if you will, of deep convection firing and concentrating in one area. But you can see as the GFS progresses, we start to see this more as we get through the next 2 to 3 days. We get more of this deep convection concentrating into the Bay of Bengal, particularly in the eastern part of it, and then that eventually becomes a tropical cyclone there, and then there's that eye as it pops out. But again, I think the GFS is going a little bit too strong on that there, and I think we'll get something a little bit weaker than this scenario. But I'll have more videos on both of these systems over the next few days into next week as they progress. I'll leave links to the official weather offices that I can find and local weather offices that I can find as well to areas that may be affected by these storms. But we're not done in terms of tropical activity. After these systems, we'll be moving our attention further east as we go into the early part of June. Now, over the next couple of weeks, we may still see some potential for development here in the Western Pacific and North Indian Ocean. Chances aren't high of that, but we will have the MJO sustaining a little bit, and that could allow potential for some additional development. But mainly, as we get into early and mid-June, we'll be paying attention closely to the Eastern Pacific and North Atlantic again. North Atlantic right on time as we start the hurricane season there. East Pacific a little bit later, as hurricane season started about a week or two ago. But you can see this area here marked by the Climate Prediction Center showing a potential for tropical development here, and we could be looking at something called a Central American gyre. It's this broad low that usually forms in the early or latter half of the season, and that can allow tropical development to occur on both sides of the landmass. It could happen in the East Pacific and in the North Atlantic, or it could happen on one side and not the other. Too far out to know exactly what's going to happen, but it's something to monitor, especially in the Atlantic, just given how warm the sea surface temperatures are. This is a sea surface temperature anomaly map that I generated last night. The hatched area is showing oceanic heat content, basically the depth of the warm water, and you can see it's very high throughout the Caribbean, right where the Climate Prediction Center marked their area of interest here for week 3. So it's something to watch, and of course the question would be, where does that go once it does form, if it does form? And we'll have to talk about that in the latter half of the development cycle once we actually get a low pressure to develop, if it does form. It's not guaranteed right now, but it makes sense given the time of year, and it just is a reminder that Atlantic hurricane season is about to start. It starts in less than 2 weeks now on June 1st. And the time to prepare is now, as once again we could be looking at a very active hurricane season. And in fact, I think NOAA's official hurricane season outlook comes out tomorrow, May 23rd, in the morning time frame. They usually do it around 10 or 11 in the morning Eastern time. That's all that I've got for today. Lots going on in the tropics. Like I said, I'll have more videos on 93W and 99B throughout the week and into next week as they progress. Stay safe in all the areas that may be impacted by these, but that's it for now. Thanks for watching.